Good morning, everyone, or I guess good afternoon, everyone. We're just letting people filter in and then we will get started. We had a fair number of people register, over 70 people register for today, so it takes a little while for everyone to filter in. I hope everyone is enjoying this beautiful weather in central New York today. Let's see, we are filtering in. Okay, let's get started. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Focus Forum. I'm Rita Riker, President of the Board of Focus Greater Syracuse, and delighted to have you with us today. Our topic today is the changing landscape of local media. We have 4 very knowledgeable panelists who will be speaking on the topic, and they will be formally introduced in just a moment. As usual, we're scheduled for 1 hour and we're recording the session. After being introduced, our panelists will each make a brief presentation followed by our Q&A. We'll begin the Q&A with questions we've received ahead of time. You can also place a question in the chat and we'll get to as many of those questions as time permits. Now, I'm very pleased to turn this over to our moderator, Chris Bolt. Chris has been covering the Central New York community for more than 30 years. He's now general manager of WAER Syracuse Public Media, after serving as the station's news director for 27 years. In addition to radio broadcast news and public affairs, Chris helped the station start its online news distribution and their webpage a decade ago. He also oversaw the launch of podcast news programs, as well as increased social media reach for the station's coverage. He has a master's degree in broadcast journalism from the Newhouse School and a doctor of education from St. John Fisher College. And fresh off the press, pun intended, congratulations to Chris for receiving the Syracuse Press Club's 2022 Sellens-Kershaw Professional Standards Award, given to a local journalist or news leader whose high standards serve as an inspiration to others in the field. Chris?
All right, thanks a lot, Rita. And thanks to Focus Greater Syracuse for this and all the forums that get people thinking and talking, or maybe even acting about many things that affect our community. I believe you can't overemphasize the importance of today's topic, how media are changing, what it might mean for our community. From the standpoint of our community, information allows us to participate in society, political, economic, social ways. Learning from a diverse set of media can also tell people in our community about each other, and I believe kind of breaks down walls as well. This is important for Syracuse City residents, from wealthy to disadvantaged, as it is to suburban families in Baldwinsville, DeWitt, or Clay, as it is to rural residents in the southern parts of our county. Of course, media habits driven by digital media have caused us all to change, especially traditional print, radio, and television stations. And those changes, finding broader audiences, will be good for the community. I can tell you if WAER airs an important story over the radio, we can only hope to reach about a quarter of the potential audience or less. Guess what? Very few people really turn on a radio every day anymore. So our challenge is to find ways to get that important content out in other ways where other audiences might listen, watch, or read. And the many questions that all brings up are exactly what our forum will be about today. As Rita said, I'll be introducing each of the panelists, and they'll have a quick take on the changing face of media, as well as taking your questions afterward. So first up, we have Julie McMahon. She's editor-in-chief of Central Current, Inc., a new nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent news organization preparing to launch just in not too long. Maybe we'll hear more about that from Julie. She's worked in journalism for a decade, mostly in central New York as a reporter, editor, and college professor. Prior to her time at Central Current, McMahon covered criminal justice, education, government, breaking news, and business as both a reporter and editor at the Post-Standard in Syracuse. Before that, she worked for legal trade publications in Boston and New York City, and she earned her undergraduate degree from SUNY Geneseo in 2011 and a master's degree in journalism at Syracuse University. Julie also serves on the Syracuse Press Club's board of directors, where she recently helped launch the Syracuse Journalism Lab, which is a project to inspire Syracuse high school students to pursue journalism careers. Thanks for joining us, Julie.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yes, so as Chris said, thank you for joining us, the fellow panelists. I'm really happy to be among your company and focus. This is such an important conversation. So thank you for convening us here today. So as Chris said, I'm the editor-in-chief of Central Current, which can be found at centralcurrent.org. We are going to be, I'm very excited to say we're going to be soft launching in the next 2 weeks. We just hired 2 news reporters. We're building our staff, board, organization, streams of revenue, and we're going to be rolling out a beautiful new website, not next week, but the week after that. So definitely check us out, follow us on social media. We're just starting to have a presence, so I'm sure you're going to be hearing more from us later in the year too. But our reporting will focus on local government and politics, issues under the umbrella of justice and equity. So stay tuned on that. And I did want to kick things off by telling you about a brand new local publication and why we are doing this, why we feel this is needed in Syracuse, why I might take a job at a startup like this after working at the Post-Standard, mostly as a reporter and as an editor for more than 7 years. So I actually made this switch, took a break from journalism, thought maybe I was done with it, kind of felt like I'd lost my belief system. I'm someone who believes that the power of information allows you to make decisions for yourself. And that's always been my connection to storytelling and to journalism and its role in democracy. So why make the switch? For me, it was a necessity. Like I said, working at a newspaper was really no longer tenable for me. I'm 32 years old. I graduated from Newhouse at Syracuse University and entered the journalism workforce in 2012. And many of you on this call will remember that in September 2012, the Post-Standard announced that it would slash its newsroom, move to a new location separate from its printing press, force employees to reapply for their jobs, and cut print delivery down to 3 days a week. So I've never known a world where newspapers, as some, put it, the golden years where the printing press was printing money in the form of display advertising, right? Legacy local media, in my time, in my perspective, really overall has not done a great job of embracing technology and especially at maintaining high ethical standards in the digital era. You all know clickbait. You all know how sensationalism drives local news. You've all seen the comment sections. Zoom out, bigger picture. Most news organizations around the country are owned by larger national chains that are driving these decisions. Across the country, those chains have greatly reduced the number of local people working and reporting the news in local communities. From 2005 to 2020, the number of local news reporters fell from 75,000 to just over 30,000. And we've seen the correlation to corruption. There's more and more studies coming out all the time. You see it and you experience it as a resident, as a reader, as a member of the audience. More search engine optimization, more memes, less investigative journalism, less storytelling, less community presence. So my entire experience with local media has been one of struggling to justify my own existence. I was the last full-time education reporter that the Post-Standard, the Syracuse newspaper, will probably ever have. I hope that's not true. In my most recent job at Syracuse.com, I was an assistant editor on the breaking news team. I had huge dreams of overhauling crime coverage to be less about symptoms, more about systems, and frankly, less racist. And those dreams I ultimately found, I thought would be impossible to implement in a system, in a legacy media company where from my perspective, it was really kind of a system that was also part of the problem. So on a personal note, my career has been sort of a struggle, and I think a lot of journalists can relate to this, to do the kind of local journalism that is meaningful, that is integral to democracy, to communities, to individuals' abilities to make decisions for themselves. So that's how I arrive at this moment when it comes to the landscape of local media. I sort of see it as something that, as legacy media dwindles, nonprofit local journalism is rising from the ashes. We've seen more than 300 local independent nonprofit news outlets like ours launch in the last 5 to 10 years. More than 70 local newsrooms launched in 2020 and 2021. So we're really excited to be a part of this movement and hopefully usher in a new business model better suited for local journalism, more reliant on loyalty, community, and the sacred contract between journalists and the reader and audience. So I have great hope for the future of local journalism, and I'm really excited to introduce the Central Current and see how it fits into the local media landscape. So thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Julie, and we'll look forward to how you answer some of the questions that will be posed to the panel. Next up is Ken Jackson, editor and publisher at Urban CNY Media. He writes weekly columns for both print and web publications. focusing on topics spanning from community activism, minority media, and government administration. Relevant to today's topic, Ken has had to take his print-only publication and make it into a website, which gets at more audience and can be interactive. Previously, Ken was a contract specialist at CDN Smith. He was president of the Syracuse Press Club in 1995. Syracuse Press Club keeps coming up here, doesn't it? And attended Ithaca College. Ken is a native of Syracuse, New York. Thanks for joining us, Ken.
Well, thanks for having me. I think this is a great opportunity to really reflect on and look at where media is going. And as someone who's been around for a long time, when I started, I was using a waxer and taking wax columns and putting them on boards and driving them out to Baldwinsville. So where we've arrived, I guess it's a bittersweet story. For me, operating what would be seen as a niche publication, targeting the urban and African American populations, for us, the web has been, for me, it's been a positive change, because in the beginning, we were looking at 5,000 print copies distributed to 25 churches and maybe 40 other locations. And the cost became really impossible. The business model wasn't working. Once we were able to transfer that to a digital model, the numbers changed. We were able to meet the obligation of getting a site up and out. We were able to get information to the public. We were able to reach more people. And what I had to do is spend a lot of time working on bridging the digital divide, which meant after 5 years of being online, we went through a redesign, a realignment of the site to make it optimized for mobile. And what that did, one of my biggest readers is a woman who's 89 years old. And where does she read it? On her iPhone. So for niche publications, for diversity, I believe that we have to look at, in my opinion, what's going to become a hybrid. You're going to have the not-for-profits that are going to be doing news. You're going to have niche publications doing independent news. And at the same time, with all of these different voices, and especially with voices like Julie's, for example, one of the problems that I've seen as an independent small publication is that when you bring pressure upon government, there are times, and I'm not going to name the government entity, but there was a time when I was pretty much threatened, told to take something down. If I did not take it down, I would not have access to that public official any longer. But luckily, being a member of the Syracuse Press Club, I took that issue to the press club, and the press club addressed it. And a copy of that went to the local DA, because it really was a threat. And with more people being watchdogs, and that's what we need, and that's what the press really was. The press was a watchdog for the people. And if I could even paraphrase what Scott Atkinson said when he was inducted into the Wall of Distinction, he really differentiated between content and news. News is something that you have to go and do research and find out, is this true? Are the things that the political leaders are saying, are they true? We have a situation in Onondaga County and in this area with transparency. If you look at the city, there is an awful lot of transparency and communication between the mayor and the common council, the police department, and various departments, and even the spending. But when we look at what's happening in the county, in order to get information to distribute to residents of Onondaga County, as a media organization, you have to show up at that location for a press conference. Otherwise, you will not receive that information. And that, in my opinion, when you start squeezing and constricting how news is being distributed to people, it's another way of censoring, of hiding, of not being upfront with people with what you want and what your vision may be. And that's why we have these battles over the federal money and where it's going, and whether we need or want an aquarium. And these are things that we really need to have discussions on. But in order to have those discussions, we really need to have true, clear, unfiltered information.
Ken, I know we wanted to, we also wanted to not lose this opportunity to say something about the passing of a long time Syracuse journalist who did exactly all the things you're talking about, putting some feet to the fire, focusing on the community, et cetera. And of course, that's Walt Shepard.
Well, for Walt Shepard, and especially my relationship with him, what I found to be very interesting and what I wrote in my piece was Walt Shepard took the New Times and turned it into a vehicle where people who weren't part of the mainstream media were African Americans and other minorities and progressives and people who weren't being covered in the Post Standard and other media. It gave them a place. He gave them legitimacy. And what many people may or may not know, Walt interviewed everyone from Howie Hawkins, Khalid Bey, to Senator DeFrancisco, to even being a contributor to Newsday.
Right.
And the one thing that I learned from him, and I'm not even there yet, but what I learned from him is, while he was a progressive, you could even say he was a socialist. He was all for a Marshall Plan for the Black community. But what you did not see in any of his interviews and any of his stories was that point of view. He was a blank slate by which you could write your story, and then he would tell that story to the community. And that gave the New Times, it was almost like being on the cover of the Rolling Stones when you're on the cover of the New Times, because you had arrived, you were there. And I believe that that's what Walt Shepard gave to the African American community. When I would be with him, we'd be walking and you would see someone walk up to him and say, hi, Walt, remember the old days at Madison School? Madison School may be condos now, but those students and Walt Shepard had a connection that lasted an entire lifetime. And I believe that's a testimony to his character and the fact that he could erase himself from a story. And as he taught me, the person tells a story, not you. The person drives a story, not you as the writer. And I will hold on to that forever, and will probably always be trying to get to that level.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for your comments about him. I knew Walt for 30 years and saw him in many different arenas, both journalism and youth development and social justice and civil rights. So thank you for at least acknowledging and honoring him at this forum really quickly. Let's move on. Now we'll hear from Mitch Gelman, President and CEO of WCNY. Prior to joining CNY in 2019, Mitch implemented media and emerging technology strategies for Fortune 500 companies, including CNN and ESPN. Might have heard of them. He's helped lead international digital operations for news, corporate, cultural, and entertainment organizations, deploying cutting-edge media products to drive revenue, increase audience, and extend brand awareness. He lives in Casanova on a small farm with his wife, Melissa, and son, Chris, and 3 dogs, 2 horses, 1 cat, and a donkey who was unavailable for comment. Mitch?
Yeah, the donkey actually is pretty loquacious. If they had asked, Hank would have had something to say. Usually braying in the middle of the night, and I'm sure the neighbors don't appreciate it. You able to see my screen by any chance?
Mm-hmm.
Is my screen sharing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Let me. Great. So I just want to walk through some context around what public media is and what it has the potential to grow into. A colleague of mine recently did a dissertation for a master's degree or overseas, in which he looked at the question of whether or not public broadcasting could survive Silicon Valley and the evolution of the changes in the media. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, that's still an open question. Public media was originally rolled out because there was an effort and a need in the 1960s that was recognized to preserve educational television, essentially, with the high cost of spectrum and production. Now that those costs have been reduced, now that anybody can publish and distribute, what is the role of public media? How can it be more relevant than ever? It's not just the kids. PBS recently released a audience study that showed in great detail that everybody, all of the PBS audience is leaving traditional linear television. In fact, the charts show an exodus in that regard. This continues with the technology trends, more people moving from cable and satellite, still strong and dominant, but the shifting continues to smartphones, tablets, or to people who are using broadband or over-the-air antennas in new ways. The platforms move rapidly, and even though a lot of the information and the message is the same, the audience is connecting on different devices, which means that production and formatting is part of the future. So how do you stay flexible and relevant in an age where things are moving so fast and adapting becomes necessary for truly your survival? And we believe here at WCNY that it means that we have to concentrate on our core values and be honest with ourselves when we address our future vision. Our mission here is to enrich the lives of the people we serve in Central New York through education, by creating economic opportunity and enhancing quality of life. Those are not dependent upon platform, technology, even revenue model necessarily. They're core values and principles that through the distribution services and the content creation that we're able to provide, and the events that we're able to use to help bring people together through partnerships is core to allow us to build in that direction. So when we look at that in education, one of the partnerships that we have is with the Reading League. The Reading League here in Syracuse is the nation's leading organization for using science in phonics to teach teachers how to teach. So we've worked with them to create a show that brings people and puppets together to advance their efforts. This show debuted last year on WCNY, is produced here locally, and is now being picked up by Alabama Public Television, and we hope will be made available to other stations and students across the country. Another partnership we have, in addition to the career and technical education program in media and marketing that we host at WCNY, we're working closely with the curriculum writing team, as I know many of you are as well, to build into the STEAM school. In terms of economic opportunity coming out of the pandemic, we partnered with Ithaca College to profile 60 businesses across 8 counties and told their stories in 3 one-hour shows that ran in prime time last August, September, and October, talking about businesses that had evolved and survived and worked with their communities during the pandemic to sustain their business and contribute to their well-being. That organically evolved into a new show that debuted I believe in March, called On the Money with Daniel Day Plouffe. This is a new business show. It doesn't tell the old stories. It looks at the future. It looks at the organizations and the individuals who, through their efforts and investment, whether it be investment of money or investment of sweat, or just pure persistence and will, are driving the economic growth of the region for the future. As well, we are committed to enhancing quality of life, both through the classical music station that we have, through series that we worked on, such as SPD, Reckoning and Reform. The SPD series looked at really 2.5, 3 years of Chief Buckner's efforts to reform the Syracuse Police Department, and was followed by neighborhood forums in which leaders and community members discuss some of the challenges of police and community relations. The other quality of life effort that we produced was a partnership with Tri-Cities Opera down in Binghamton, in which we told the story of veterans coming back from war with the U.S. military band, and that complemented a partnership with the Syracuse Opera during the pandemic, in which we produced No Cowards in Our Band, the story of Frederick Douglass and his work, including a talk that he gave in Syracuse back in the 1800s. So on the FM station, in addition to the classical music station efforts, we are seeking cross-platform presence in terms of the streaming work. We're working on a alpha project, which is a podcasting distribution delivery system that's slightly different than what people are currently using to discover podcasts. We're hopeful that that can be an asset for public broadcasting and NPR stations here and across the country. And we're looking to enhance the community broadcasting that we do on what's currently a jazz station. We talked a little bit about reckoning and reform, and now we look at all of this within the context of the changing landscape that we talked about, including the skill sets that we need, something Julie and I have talked a lot about, where you're not just looking for people who can play a role, you're looking for people who have initiative, people who have the flexibility and the versatility, as well as the work ethic necessary to adapt as they move forward. These are new skill sets that we look for in our hiring. So by providing public communications in the public interest, through our focus on education, economic opportunity, and quality of life, we believe that we can continue to be relevant, focused on local stories and local services for our local community. I will now ask our moderator if we have time for me to show a 1.5-minute video, or if you would like to move on with the program.
I think we better move on. We're really running out of time to get to any questions, if you don't mind.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your
Mitch.
time, and I will stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I'd love to see it, but we're just like really eating into time. But that was great. And thank you for telling us about some of the things going on at CNY. Finally, for opening remarks, we have Joel Kaplan. Joel is a professor in the Newhouse School's Department of Magazine, News, and Digital Journalism, and the Associate Dean for Graduate Programs there. A former investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune and past reporter for the Tennessean in Nashville. He's co-author of Murder of Innocence, the tragic life and final rampage of Laura Dan, of which a movie version was made for CBS. He served as ombudsman for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, responsible for reinforcing objectivity, balance, fairness, and transparency within public media. Kaplan was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University and a Journalism Fellow at Yale Law School, where he received a master's in the study of law He also earned a master's in journalism from the University of Illinois. Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, that long introduction left me no time, and I know we're kind of short on time, so I'll try to keep it brief. But and with the risk of being a Debbie Downer and pining for the good old days, I'm going to be a Debbie Downer and pine for the good old days, because local journalism is in crisis, big time crisis. And despite the growth of not-for-profit media and your niche publications, it doesn't matter, because people aren't getting their local news that they need. And because local journalism is in crisis, democracy is in crisis. What do I mean by that? When was the last time you saw a good investigative story out of Albany? In the old days, every publication, major publication in New York State, had their own representative in Albany. Now, maybe a wire service reporter, maybe someone from the New York Times goes in and out. You have a legislature that is running rampant over what's happening in the state, and we don't know anything about it. How many reporters are covering Syracuse City Common Council? How many reporters are covering County Commission? How many are covering the JD School Board, the FM School Board, the CNS School Board? Julie, how many? Zero. Maybe an Eagle newspaper reporter, depending on their deadline. And that's how corruption gets bred. And that's why we're in an unbelievable state right now. And we can turn a blind eye to it, but it's going to manifest itself. And the niche publications are great. They've always existed. Public television is great. It's always existed. WAR is great. Always existed. It's not a panacea for what's going on right here. So we're talking also about, we talk a lot, you hear about income inequality, right? What you don't hear enough about is journalistic inequality. And that's what we have going on right now. We have two great publications, maybe three: Washington Post, the New York Times, to some extent, the Wall Street Journal. Fantastic work. Read it every day. It's unbelievable. You know, they're better than they've ever been, in my opinion. Great. What about local media? I mean, Julie talked about going from 75,000 local reporters to 30,000. Guess what? They also went from probably an average salary of 75,000 to 30,000 at the same time, right? And for me, that's tough. I'm in charge of a communication school that teaches journalism. So how am I expected to educate people at 80 grand a year to get a job that may or may not exist for 30 grand a year? Doesn't work. And that's why all their parents are saying, go to computer science, go to accounting, go to these things. So the best and brightest for a long time, I count Julie and my fellow panelists, went into journalism. It's not the same anymore. And the loser is going to be the public. This is an opportunity, but because you're going to have, like Julie's new publication, we have The Stand, Ashley's on this, Ashley King's on this, that Newhouse School put together to cover the South Side. We got Ken's publication there. We do have WCNY, and we got WAR in Chicago. The Chicago Sun-Times has joined hands with their public radio station to form their own media group. So we have not-for-profits beyond local not-for-profit, ProPublica, Center for Public Integrity. They go into places and they do some really good stuff. Someone asked about investigative reporting. There's great investigative reporting going on. But the day-to-day stuff, the day-to-day, what's happening in your community, not there. And I'm not sure what the answer is. To some degree, legacy media blew it, you know, because we were so wealthy. I mean, the printing press was a money printing press for the longest time. When Julie said 2012 they had layoffs, Newhouse family, which owns the Post Standard and all these other, had a policy. They're not going to ever lay off anyone. They had to give in. A guy named Craig Newmark came along and decided classified advertisement could be free on the web, on the internet. That was a huge part. And then newspapers were reluctant to go online early on. You know, in 2000, newspaper stocks were out of this world. They were Google stocks of their time. But you know what? We want to keep that print. We want to keep that print. We're not going to go online because we can't sell advertisements much online. So Google came in and Apple came in and Facebook came in and took all the revenue. And now finally, you know, what's the most expensive part of running a newspaper? So it's the printing of it and the distribution of it. If you're online, you don't have either of those things. Too late though. And that's why Post Standard went to 3 days a week. They're trying to get people to go there. So I'm worried. The good thing is that we have thinkers out there figuring out a way to the next generation of news and how to get people to do it. But, you know, niche publications are good, but they also can cause problems, right? Because if you get only the people reading you who believe in what you're writing about, then you got Fox News versus MSNBC, and you get people who've never heard, you got half the people who think the election was stolen to this day, despite mounds and mounds of evidence that it wasn't. And then you have the other side basically saying that, you know, Clarence Thomas and Ginny Thomas are part of QAnon. So, I mean, I don't know which way you go unless you have some type of an objective publication that's going to give you news and valuable news, but most particularly valuable local news. And I have a lot more to say, but we've said a lot. And so I want to open it up to questions.
Well,
Right.
before we even do that, I think one of the comments that you made about niche publications, I think one thing I want to bring up, and that a key element in this is ownership. One of the reasons why African Americans especially are doing niche publications is because we did not have a role in legacy media. And if you're not writing the stories, if you're not producing the content, then guess what? The content is not going to be about you or written by people that have that sensitivity. So I push back at that, and also the fact that even niche publications, even mine, I publish a broad spectrum of information that I want that audience to read. And just because I'm targeting an urban and African American audience, it doesn't mean that a lot of my audience isn't of that broad base. So I think that the counting out niche publications in a sense cuts out diversity. And I think we have to be very careful when we talk about that.
Well, I just want to respond. I think you missed my point. So you do this great stuff for your audience, right? But the 95% of the rest of the community never see that because only your audience is seeing that. And I, you know, I grew up in Chicago, right? And I was covered City Hall with the Chicago Defender. I understand the importance of community-based reporting. And I think we're doing a better job, but we could still do a better job of diversifying our newsroom. We have a minority fellowship program that has put about 300 journalists of color into newsrooms. Unfortunately, they're not staying in newsrooms because they found that they can do other things with what you gather. The ability to be a journalist, the critical thinking and the writing is so valuable in this country that they're being picked up by, you know, media, public relations. You know, for every journalist that we lost, that Julie said we lost, we got 5 PR people who took their place working for different companies. So Ken, I didn't mean to demean anything that I was saying. I was just trying to point out that the great stuff you do is not seen by a vast majority of the people in Central New York.
Yeah, let's move on a little bit, get to some of the questions that had been submitted. And let's first talk about how do media organizations choose the topics they cover, and has that changed with media habits and the, you know, both people's habits and how we're now thinking about distributing media? Julie, you're trying to launch an online publication. You're going to try to choose topics to cover. How do you choose what to cover, and has that changed over time from print to, say, an online source?
So technology, once again, has absolutely changed how we interact with our audience. We have more information than ever about what our audience is reading. So the conversation we were just having about how to reach people, niche audiences, you know, whether or not, you know, what's going to be the answer to what's happened in local media and the failures of legacy media. So, you know, that's all things that we're talking about right now, and how do we make those choices absolutely has changed because we can engage with our audiences in ways that maybe in the past I think one of the things Ken mentioned was the gatekeeping function of traditional media. That's one of the benefits of digital, that anyone can start a website. As Joel pointed out, there's not that kind of overhead cost of printing, distribution. So in some ways, that's a benefit that allows us to connect with people to see what they're reading in real time. I'll give you the worst case scenario is that data, those numbers drive what gets covered. So, worst case scenario here, I watch plenty of gossip TV, but Kim Kardashian gets a lot of clicks. So if you run photos of Kim Kardashian, that's going to drive up, so that is driving editorial decisions. How are we staffing newsrooms? What topics are we covering? What are we dedicating our staff to, which really is, how we do journalism. So what I hope is that we've been through sort of the clunky shift to digital, and that we are now in this phase of maybe refining. And I think if you look at people who are studying technology and sort of internet 2.0 and beyond, now we have this opportunity to make these digital tools work for us instead of sort of being forced to use them as we did for so long. So one of the things that I'm excited about with Central Current is being able to ask the community. One of the first things we're going to do on May 24th, 25th, when we have our new site, is have a survey and just ask, I have an idea of where I want to go with this, but I'm not going to be an editor who doesn't look like the people in the community I cover, making decisions from a closed door office about what's good for this community and what information people need. I'm going to ask, and I'm going to do my best to do that. And I think, again, digital tools give us a great opportunity for that.
Let's keep answers really short. We're down to like 10 minutes, and just so we can get some things going. Mitch, just real quickly, how would WCNY choose what you might focus a special program on, and has that changed because of media distribution and habits?
The focus of the coverage needs to tie into the mission, which is to educate, create economic opportunity, and to support the enhancement of quality of life in the region. So that hasn't changed. What has changed is the formatting. So you will see on all of our shows as we move forward on television, on radio, that we're not simply producing for one platform. Everything is a cross-platform publication. On the Money is a good example of that. On the Money is a half-hour television show on business and economic growth, but it has short segments that are very quick, and they're within the television show, but they're also built so that they can be sliced out and distributed across other platforms to new audiences.
Joel, just real quickly, have you weigh in. What do you see in terms of what media organizations are or aren't covering based on media habits?
Well, I will just echo what Julie said. In the good old days, all news organizations came up with stories that they thought the public needed to know, whether it's budgets or assessments or things like that. Fortunately, now we're giving them what they want to know. And we know that because they vote with their clicks. And I was at the Chicago Tribune right before the pandemic, and they had a huge board where they had every story that was in that paper that day and how many clicks on that paper. Well, if you're at the top, you're being rewarded. It doesn't take long for that type of reinforcement to say, okay, I'm going to give the public what they want because that's going to get me more clicks.
Ken,
Yes.
Just in the conversation you were having with Joel a little bit, this is kind of tangential, but somewhat related. How is the diverse community accounted for in media coverage, and can underrepresented segments of the community both find information that's relevant to them to make them informed decisions, but also be part of who's covered in media to really more accurately represent what our community is in its diversity?
Well, one of the things I've found, and I think that you can even look at the professional recognition that we've received, it's been by picking up stories that legacy media refused to look at, doing in-depth stories about lead paint and who operates the rentals that have all the lead in them. So I think being able to provide the information that others aren't. And it's very easy, in my opinion, living in a community that's not covered. I have stories stacked up like an airport. And my issue is having the people where I can say, we need to go and look at this budget because there are several things that aren't going on here. We need to go and look at this spending because there's a problem there. We need to go and look at 200 apartments that may be owned by agencies and aren't rentable. So we need to go look at that. So I believe that the ideas are there, but I believe what we're going to have to do in the future, moving forward in the future, it's getting the feet on the ground to be able to go and ask those hard questions and get those answers.
Other thoughts about, just other thoughts about how we can better cover the diversity of the community?
By listening, because the community will tell you.
Maybe, yeah, somebody else maybe.
In terms of, and having that relationship with the community. For example, Mitch has built a relationship with the community, as Julie has, as I have. And when you build those relationships, you have people call you, you have people send emails, you have people that will, there are situations where I was sent pictures by employees that did not want to be discovered, but they wanted me to get this information, to get it out. So I believe that that's the shift that we're going to have. And I believe that it's going to be up to us that are working in this media to work it properly. And very quickly, because time is short, for me, it's been a growth because printing 5,000 copies, going to 30 churches or 20 churches and 30 other locations, and then going up to 40,000 unique visitors and 1,000 visitors a day and things like that. For smaller publications, the internet is going to be a bonanza because we'll be able to participate and compete. And
Anyone else? Anyone else want to weigh in on diversity? And
yeah, I'll like to. And I think Ken made some very important points. And listening, also being present is critically important, and putting local back into local news is something that Julie and I have been talking a lot about, and Ken does an exceptional job of. One of the things we're going to try here at WCNY is we have a cafe right across from Performance Park, down on the first floor, and we want to turn that into a cafe newsroom, a place where the Central Current staff, where Ken can come and he's working on stories. We've got a radio studio literally 100 feet down the street from the cafe. We always want to have a quarter cup of coffee. Anybody wants to come by, come on down, meet the journalist, talk to the journalist, get a quarter cup. Now, if you want the latte or the croissants, that's going to be $4 or $5. We got to pay for the staff. But there'll always be a quarter cup of coffee. It might be Maxwell House, but come on in and meet the journalists, have the journalists there, turn it into a real newsroom, a community newsroom and a community cafe. And you know what? The goal, dream is if there's a great conversation going on in the coffee house, we say, hey, walk down the hall because we're in the middle of our 12 to 2 community broadcasting show on on HD3. Take that conversation into the studio and share it with the rest of the town.
Just switching gears a little bit, but a little kind of related. A couple different people asked about getting access to media to get public service announcements, community events, and nonprofits a lot of times, are trying to access sort of what you might call earned media because they don't really have advertising budgets. How has that changed? And sort of in the world of clickbait, that's just not going to be clickbait information ever. But how has that changed? And what do you see about the future of that? And maybe even what is lost when stuff like that can't really find a place on media other than sort of a Facebook kind of thing?
I
find a place for it. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Exactly, Ken. You find a place for it because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's when I started talking at the beginning of this conversation was about really my experiences. Journalism doesn't fit neatly into a business model. and as the world changes, as technology changes, sometimes we have to do things because they're the right thing to do for our community. And that's why we do journalism. That being said, we do live in a world where we got to pay the bills at the end of the day. So it's a luxury when we get to make that choice. But that was my answer to the question about diversity. 100% agree with Ken. It's about showing up. It's about going to places. When we have fewer reporters, we have fewer people showing up in communities. And it's about collaborating. I'm really excited. We've all talked about, I know everyone on this chat, Ken and I have talked about collaborating, partnerships with content, reporting projects. Mitch has been a huge support at WCNY, Chris, we've met. Joel was a teacher of mine. And I think the future and what I like about the nonprofit model is that it's very collaborative. It's, I hope someday we're sharing, everything we publish, and we got to figure out what that looks like. But, deciding what does this community need and making a point to focus on those things, whether it's a topic or taking a risk. And this, my answer to the diversity question is we have to walk away from business practices that isolate and hurt communities, especially communities of color. And the truth is that we are continuing to do that as media organizations. We can all do better. So I think that's a first step too.
Joel, what do you see about, is it lost? Are these little things that really are part of our community lost because there's no PSAs anymore in the community or the nonprofit announcements? And if that's lost, what do we lose?
So actually, it shouldn't be lost because the beauty of digital media is that there's unlimited space and time, which you didn't have before in the newspaper or on your radio station or your TV station. Everyone has websites. And so it's really no reason not to do that. The question is how you display it and how people get access to it and make sure that they have access to it. But then, you have email stuff and all the other stuff. And for your people saying, another cliche, content is king, right? So it might not be the greatest content, but it still fills stuff. And people should never be afraid to email or text a reporter because they're always interested. And you know what? Even the most mundane things can end up to be a great story. And so just very briefly, we talked before about, getting out into these communities. One of the problems is that we've always said, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Because it's the easiest thing to do to cover police news and what's happening. And so the only time people hear about communities is when there's a shooting or a robbery or something like that. And that's in the local newscast. I used to work with Dean Baquet, who's the retiring editor of the New York Times. And he would, it's still old shoe leather reporting. You go into communities that are underserved, that no one really reports, and you go around and you say, what stories are going on here that haven't been covered? What stories haven't been covered? And I'm telling you, every person, every family, every house has a story. You just got to figure out what it is. We don't have the personnel now to do that, but the personnel that's left still should be doing it. They shouldn't be sitting at their desk with their cell phones, texting the usual suspects. They need to get out and see what's going on in their community.
Okay, 2 questions left, and we're going to do rapid fire. Everybody gets to answer, but you got to do it in 1 sentence, which I know all of you absolutely hate, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to hit the mute button if you go too long. One of which is, what's the difference in audience experience, and how does that affect what we do? Consuming something in the phone as opposed to really sitting down and reading or watching a TV program.
So
Mitch first.
It's our obligation to meet the audience where they are, to get them the information they need where they are. We may be, the community cafe, the newsroom, that's going back to the old forum, the old, what did they do in Rome? You went down where
Right.
people gathered and you shared the news and had the conversation.
Julie.
It's different, but it doesn't have to be worse.
Good one. Ken.
I'm heartened by the fact that an 89-year-old woman is reading my content on her phone. That gives me hope.
Joel.
So we have classes in mobile storytelling and in social media because attention spans have gotten really narrow and you got to meet them where they are.
Last thing, and this, again, you guys are going to absolutely hate this, but what are your feelings about, with the access to information, so great in a way, but the things we've talked about in terms of what is actually displayed in media, what are your feelings about how media are now serving democracy? Ken, you get to go first.
It's not serving democracy, and period. It's not serving democracy, because if so, there'll be many, many, many more investigative stories instead of stories about an opening of a furniture store at Great Northern or a t-shirt store in Destiny where the temperature is below 64.
Joel.
I agree with Ken. I mean, and I said it earlier, that's our major problem. Our real major problem is, how is democracy not being served and how can we get back to serving it?
Julie?
Not sure I can add much better than that. But yes, I mean, I agree. The model's broken. I'm optimistic that we can find ways to fix it, but we've got a long way to go.
And Mitch, you get the last word on this one.
But two things. One, I think we have to ask ourselves, is it a supply problem or a demand problem? And if it's a demand problem, then it's a very different equation. It's not just getting the information and distributing it. It's making sure that there's people on the other side who want to absorb that information and take the time to use it. And the second and most important thing, I'm just hoping, Kim, when I'm 89, I can still read anything on the phone.
A great place to leave it. Thank you all so much. This is a super important topic because it is about our community and how we know about each other and interact with each other and how we are able to participate in our community and our democracy. So thanks so much. I know we're all struggling with all these things in our media organization, so myself included. So thanks to Forum, thanks for the Forum to Focus Greater Syracuse. And thank you so much, Rita, for you and yours to be putting this together.
Oh, you're very welcome. I want to add my thanks to our panelists and to Chris. I've seen in the notes on the chat that, you know, the feeling is we need a part 2. So we may be calling you back in the future. There's just so much to be covered here. Just very grateful for you being here. Also, I want to note that we're going to be posting, we've recorded this session. It's going to be posted on the Focus website, focussyracuse.org. So if you want to share this experience with other people, please let them know that it'll be there. Finally, I want to say that, you know, Focus is able to make these opportunities available with the financial support of the community. We recently launched an annual appeal and we would appreciate your support. Please watch for a follow-up in your inbox or go to our website, focussyracuse.org to make a donation. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy this beautiful weather while it lasts. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.